He had survived 3 combat deployments, 2 IED blasts, and the kind of silence that follows a 21-gun salute. But nothing had prepared him for the sound of something scratching at his back door at 2 in the morning in the middle of a Montana winter. Theo Callahan set down his coffee mug and didn't move. He had learned, a long time ago, that the first instinct is usually right. And his first instinct said, "Don't open it." He was 53 years old, retired from the Navy SEALs after 26 years, and had been living alone on 11 acres outside of Whitefish for the better part of 2 years. He had chosen this place deliberately. The distance from town, the way the pines closed in around the property like a wall, the fact that his nearest neighbor was a retired schoolteacher named Harriet, who respected quiet and never dropped by unannounced. He had chosen it the way a man chooses a foxhole. Not because it's comfortable, but because nothing can get to you from the sides. The scratching came again, and then a sound he hadn't heard in 4 years, a sound he had told himself he would never let himself miss, a thin, barely there whimper, the kind that a dog makes when it has run out of options and is placing its last bet on a stranger's mercy. Theo stood up slowly. He had lost a dog once. Not lost the way people say it when they mean the dog ran off or got old. He meant the other kind of lost. The kind where you are 22 meters from the blast, and your partner takes the whole of it, and you walk out of the smoke carrying nothing but the collar. His dog's name had been Sergeant, and Sergeant had been a German Shepherd, and for 4 years Theo had not let another dog within arm's reach of his heart. He opened the back door anyway. She was large, or she had been once. Now she was hollow. A German Shepherd, maybe 6 or 7 years old, her coat matted with ice and dried blood along her left flank where something had caught her, maybe barbed wire, maybe something worse. She was lying on her side on his back porch, and she looked up at him with the specific exhaustion of a creature that has been carrying something too heavy for too long and has finally decided to set it down. Behind her, pressed into the corner where the porch railing met the wall, were 3 puppies. 2 of them were huddled together, shaking. The third, the smallest, a dark brindle with one ear that flopped forward and one that stood straight up, had its nose pointed directly at Theo's boot, as if it had already made a decision about him that Theo hadn't yet been consulted on. Theo looked at the mother. He looked at the puppies. He looked out at the dark line of trees where the snow was still coming down in slow, indifferent sheets. He said out loud, to no one, "No." Then he stepped back and held the door open. He hadn't planned on keeping them. That was the thing he told himself that first night, while he was boiling water and trying to remember if he had anything in the pantry that a nursing mother could eat. He was going to warm them up, get them through the night, and in the morning he was going to call the Flathead County Animal Shelter and have someone come get them. That was the plan. The mother, he called her River, because she had come out of the dark the way rivers arrive in droughts, without announcement, changing everything. Ate 2 cans of tuna and half a sleeve of crackers, and then lay down in front of the wood stove like she had been doing it for years. The puppies climbed over her like she was furniture. The brindle one, the small one with the mismatched ears, fell off the edge of the dog bed Theo had made from a folded horse blanket, rolled onto the hardwood floor, righted itself, and then looked up at Theo with an expression that could only be described as unbothered. Theo watched it from across the room. He had a rule about dogs. The rule was simple. Not anymore. The brindle puppy waddled toward his boot. "Don't," Theo said. The puppy sat on his boot. Theo looked at the ceiling. He called the shelter the next morning. They were full. They would call him back when they had space, which could be anywhere from a week to 3 weeks depending on intake. He thanked them, hung up the phone, and stood in his kitchen for a long moment, listening to the sound of 3 puppies attempting to climb into a mixing bowl he had left on the floor. He named the brindle one Ruckus. Not affectionately, he told himself, practically, because that was what it was. The other 2 he took longer with. The second one was a pale gold, almost white, with dark eyes that watched everything with a seriousness that seemed disproportionate to its size. Theo called it Compass. The third was the quiet one, darker, more reserved, content to observe from a distance before committing to anything. That one he called Ghost. He told himself names were just organizational. They did not mean anything. River was sick. He didn't understand it at first. She ate well, drank well, let the puppies nurse without complaint. But by the fourth day he noticed the way she was breathing. Shallow, effortful, like she was working for each one. He drove her to the veterinary clinic in Whitefish in his truck, the 3 puppies in a laundry basket on the passenger seat, because he had no idea what else to do with them. The vet, a young woman named Dr. Foss, examined River quietly, and then pulled Theo outside the exam room and spoke to him in the careful, measured voice that Theo recognized from a different kind of professional. The kind who has learned to deliver information that cannot be improved by delivery. River had a systemic infection. She had likely been carrying it for days before she found Theo's back porch. She had survived long enough to get her puppy somewhere warm. Dr. Foss could treat her aggressively, but she wanted Theo to understand what aggressive treatment meant in this case, and what the realistic range of outcomes looked like. Theo stood in the hallway outside the exam room and listened to all of it without expression. On the drive back to Whitefish, Ruckus crawled out of the laundry basket and fell asleep on Theo's thigh. Theo didn't move it, he said, out loud to no one. I am not the right person for this. Ruckus didn't respond. Ruckus was asleep. River died on a Tuesday morning, 11 days after she arrived. She went quietly, in front of the wood stove, with Theo sitting on the floor beside her, because he had been there when she woke in the night and couldn't seem to stop being there after that. The 3 puppies were asleep in a pile near her stomach. She looked at Theo at the end the way dogs look at the people they have decided to trust. Completely, without reservation, without asking for anything in return. Theo sat on the floor for a long time after. He had buried things before. He knew how to do it. You dig the hole the right size, you put in what belongs there, you fill it back up. What he had never quite figured out was what to do with the weight that stayed in your chest afterward, the specific heaviness of something that used to be alive and needed you and doesn't anymore. He went outside and dug a grave at the edge of the tree line where the morning sun came through longest. The ground was hard. It took nearly 2 hours. When he came back inside, Ruckus was sitting in the middle of the kitchen floor, looking at him with its head tilted at a 45-degree angle, as if performing a diagnostic. I know, Theo said. Ruckus sneezed, then waddled to the water bowl. He had expected the grief to make him want to give them away faster. Instead, it did something he hadn't predicted. It made him afraid to. River had gotten them this far. She had dragged herself through a Montana winter with a wound in her flank and 3 puppies behind her, and she had lasted exactly long enough to put them in front of a door she had apparently decided was the right one. Theo did not have a religious vocabulary for what that was, but he had spent enough years in situations where the margin between living and not was razor thin to know that some things arrive with weight attached, and you don't set them down lightly. He called the shelter. They had space now. He stood with the phone in his hand for 17 seconds, which he was aware of because the clock on the microwave was in his direct line of sight. He hung up without speaking. There is a specific kind of chaos that 3 German Shepherd puppies at 8 weeks old introduce into a house that has been silent for 2 years, and Theo was not prepared for any of it. Ruckus dismantled the leg of a kitchen chair with a focus and commitment that, in any other context, Theo would have recognized as admirable. The chair leg was not threatened in Ruckus. Ruckus had simply identified it as unacceptable and was handling the situation accordingly. Compass, the pale one, the serious one, had developed a method for opening the cabinet under the sink that involved its nose, both front paws, and a degree of strategic patience that Theo found genuinely unsettling. He had been a Navy SEAL. He had trained with some of the most capable people on Earth. Compass had figured out the cabinet in 4 days and had shown no signs of stopping at the cabinet. Ghost remained the observer. Ghost watched Ruckus destroy the chair leg with the expression of someone who has seen this kind of thing before and has made peace with it. Ghost watched Compass work the cabinet with what appeared to be professional respect. Ghost watched Theo with something else, something quieter, harder to name. Ghost had a way of appearing in whatever room Theo was in and settling near him without touching him, without demanding anything, just being there, a warm and steady presence at the edge of his peripheral vision. It was Ghost that Theo talked to first. Not on purpose. He was sitting at the kitchen table one evening going through mail he had been avoiding, and he said, out loud, not quite to anyone, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with any of this." Ghost looked up from the floor beside his chair. "The truck needs new tires before March," Theo said. "The back fence is coming apart at the north corner, and apparently there's something wrong with the property tax assessment, which I was supposed to respond to 2 months ago." Ghost held eye contact. "I know," Theo said. "I know." He went to bed that night and slept 4.5 hours uninterrupted, which was the most he had slept in a single stretch since well before he could remember. His sister Paulette called on a Sunday, which she did every Sunday, which Theo appreciated in the way you appreciate a lighthouse. Not because you intend to sail toward it, but because it tells you where the rocks are. "You sound different," she said. "I sound the same. You sound like you've been talking to people." There was a pause that Theo was aware of but didn't fill. "Are there people there?" Paulette asked, with a careful hope in her voice that made Theo uncomfortable. "Not people," he said. He told her about River. He told her about the 3 puppies, and about Ruckus and the chair leg, and about Compass and the cabinet under the sink. He told her about Ghost, and the way Ghost appeared in whatever room he occupied, and the way he had started narrating his day out loud, because it turned out Ghost was a better listener than most people he had known. Paulette was quiet for a moment when he finished. Then she said, "Theo, baby, you kept them." "I'm still evaluating the situation," he said. "You named them. That's organizational." "You named the dogs," she said again, and her voice had something in it that he hadn't heard directed at him in a long time. Relief, maybe, or something adjacent to it. He changed the subject, but he let her stay on the phone for 45 minutes longer than usual, which was his way of saying something he didn't have the right word for yet. February in Whitefish is not a month for the unprepared. The temperature dropped to 12 below on a Wednesday night and stayed there. Theo put extra blankets down, ran the wood stove through the night, and checked on the puppies more times than he would admit to in daylight. At 3 in the morning, he found all 3 of them piled on top of each other in the corner nearest the stove, with Ghost somehow at the bottom of the stack, and Ruckus somehow still managing to take up more space than its body size suggested was physically possible. He sat on the floor in the dark next to the wood stove and watched them breathe. He had not planned this. He had planned for quiet, for order, for the particular piece of a house where nothing unexpected happened and no one needed anything from him. He had built that life the way he had been trained to build a perimeter. Methodically, deliberately, with a clear sense of what he was trying to keep out. He had not planned for a dying dog to bring 3 lives to his back door and leave them there like a set of instructions he hadn't asked for and couldn't ignore. He put another log on the fire. Ruckus, without waking, rolled over and pressed its back against his knee. He stayed on the floor until the light came up. Spring arrived the way it does in Montana, not all at once but in dispatches. A week of mud, then a week of cold sun that felt like a promise it wasn't quite ready to keep. Then one morning, Theo walked out to the back porch with his coffee, and the air smelled like pine needles and moving water, and he stood there long enough that Ghost came and sat beside him on the porch without being asked, looking out at the tree line the way Theo was looking, as if whatever Theo was searching for was worth looking for. He had started sleeping 6 hours, sometimes 7. He had fixed the north fence. He had responded to the property tax letter. He had driven into town twice in 1 week, which was twice more than his previous average, because Ruckus needed a specific kind of chew toy that the hardware store didn't carry. And Compass had eaten through the bottom cabinet seal, and he needed weather stripping, and Dr. Foss had said to bring the puppies in for their next round of vaccines. He had stood in the waiting room of the veterinary clinic with all 3 puppies on leashes. Ruckus performing a full structural review of the baseboards. Compass watching the front door with tactical interest, Ghost sitting precisely at Theo's left heel as if this was a trained position and not something the dog had simply decided on its own, and a woman in her 60s with a tabby cat carrier had looked at the 3 dogs and said, "Are those German Shepherds?" "They are," Theo said. "My husband had one," she said. "Best dog he ever knew. Best years of our lives, those years." She said it with a past tense that Theo recognized. He recognized the particular shape of that particular grief. "I'm sorry," he said. "Don't be," she said. "We were lucky to have it." She looked at the 3 dogs again. Looks like you're going to be too. He didn't correct her this time. There was a night in March, the kind of night that comes without warning, where everything that a man has successfully not thought about for months decides to arrive at once and sit down at the table like it never left. When Theo found himself outside at midnight, standing at the grave he had dug for River at the edge of the tree line. He didn't know what he had come out to say. He hadn't come with anything prepared. He stood in the dark in his coat and his boots, and the night was clear enough that the stars were sharp and plentiful, and completely indifferent to what any particular man was feeling on any particular night in Montana. He had been thinking about Sargent. He had been thinking about the last morning, the narrow street, the particular quality of the silence before it wasn't silent anymore, and all the years of not thinking about it, that had kept the memory compressed into something small enough to live with, had come loose somehow, and there was nothing to do but stand in the dark and let it be what it was. He heard the back door. He had latched it. He was certain he had latched it. He turned around, and Ghost was there, at the edge of the porch light, watching him with those steady, calm eyes, not approaching, not retreating, just present, in the way Ghost had learned to be present, close enough to matter, careful enough not to crowd. Theo let out a long breath. He walked back to the house. When he reached the porch, Ghost stepped to his left side, the left heel position, the self-assigned post, and walked with him to the door. Inside, Ruckus was asleep on the kitchen floor. Compass had, at some point during the night, relocated to the foot of the couch and was occupying exactly 1/3 of it in the methodical way. Compass occupied everything, as if it had taken measurements first. Theo sat down in the armchair. Ghost lay down beside the chair, close enough that Theo could feel the warmth of it, and went to sleep. He sat there in the quiet. Not the old quiet, not the empty kind he had built this house to contain, but a different kind, fuller. The quiet of a house that has sleeping things in it, the quiet of something that has been tended. He sat in it for a long time. By April he had stopped telling himself he was still evaluating the situation. It wasn't a decision he arrived at through reasoning. It was more like he woke up one morning, and the decision had already been made somewhere below the level of reasoning, in the place where the things that are true about you live before you have the language for them. He had kept them. He had kept them the night he opened the door, and every night since, and the only thing left was to admit it to himself. He drove into Whitefish and bought 3 proper dog beds and a bag of food big enough that carrying it from the truck to the porch required both arms and a strategy. He bought a brush for the longer-coated one, which was Ruckus, because Ruckus had grown into a dog with opinions about everything, including, apparently, the wind direction, and had corresponding fur volume. He bought a second latch for the cabinet under the sink, because Compass had defeated the first one in a single afternoon. He put the dog beds in the living room. Ruckus slept on the kitchen floor. Compass slept on the couch. Ghost slept beside the armchair, at Theo's left heel, exactly where Ghost had decided long ago was the right place to be. Theo looked at the 3 of them one night from across the room and felt something that he did not have a practiced name for. Not happiness exactly, which had always seemed to him like a thing that was happening slightly elsewhere. This was quieter than happiness, more like the moment after a long extraction, when you are finally somewhere safe and the weight of what you've been carrying starts to understand that it can set itself down. He thought about River. He thought about a German shepherd who had walked through a Montana winter with a wound in her side and 3 puppies behind her, and had found a back porch, and had rested her head on a stranger's floor, and trusted that it would be enough. He thought about what it cost to trust something like that, and how most people never do it, and how right she had been. He reached over and scratched behind Ghost's ears. Ghost opened one eye, confirmed that everything was acceptable, and went back to sleep. Outside, the last of the winter ice was coming off the north fence, dripping into the mud with a sound like small decisions being made. The pines stood in the last light. The stars were starting up. Inside, the wood stove ticked warmly, and Ruckus snored, and Compass dreamed something that made its paws move in a slow, deliberate rhythm, and Ghost breathed steadily at Theo's left side, and Theo Callahan, who had survived 3 deployments and 2 blasts, and the kind of silence that follows a 21-gun salute, and who had built his walls high and his perimeter tight and his door locked against everything soft, sat in his armchair in the warm light of a house that was no longer quiet in the way it used to be quiet, and found, to his surprise, that he was not sorry.